Welcome to God, Money, and Me, a 4-week workshop that we're going to discuss the relationship between those items, God, money, and me. I'm joined by Dr. Joe Monaco, who's going to be helping me over the course of this, and hopefully you find this content helpful and productive as we dive in a 4-week exploration of our finances. And it's going to be a progression of different topics. Today's really kind of a broad overview, philosophy of money, if you will, as we kind of look at things, some of the things that the Bible says. We're going to give everybody a God, Money, and Me book. For those watching online, we'll send this out to you as well. This was written by Pastor Paul DeYoung, who published it about a year ago. A lot of what's talked about in here is the aspects of the God side. Probably the last quarter of the book or the last third of the book gets into some practical models on saving and spending and giving. This is not a course on giving. This is kind of a practical to help you with finances, but we will explore a little bit today about what the Bible says about money and then jump into budgeting and debt reduction over the course of the next couple of weeks with Dr. Joe Monaco's experience. Obviously, we're going to talk about retirement and investing some as well. And then even the last week, have a couple other financial gurus, so to speak, that are up and helping us work through some major life purchases, money wisdom, overall general advice, and then we'll hit Q&A through the course of this. So with that in mind, why does any of this matter? I think the reality of why some of this matters is because all of us are in a different stage and setting with our finances. We have different jobs, we have different work experiences, we have different life circumstances that come up to us. And so, as you can see, this was a study done right before the pandemic. 66% of consumers were living paycheck to paycheck. And so that's really what we're exploring. Now, stimulus payments, different things impacted that some. This same study monitored it through the next year or so. But you can see age and income doesn't make that much a difference because what you'll learn really, personal finance math is not the hardest math in the world. It's pretty simple, unless you get into heavy side of investing and those types of things are more complex concepts. But for the most part, it's behavioral patterns that really drive the decisions that we make with our personal finances. So you can see now that study shows about 54% of people are living paycheck to paycheck. And it doesn't really matter the income bracket. You can see the behavior patterns still exist. 40% of people above $100,000 a year, paycheck to paycheck. Now you can see $50,000, less than 50 per year, 72%, it's a higher percentage. But even more so, when it comes to the demographics, right now the largest demographic living paycheck to paycheck is in the millennial category. And then especially among bridge millennials, or I think they're called Xennials now as well. Unfortunately, I still fit into that group as far as an age category goes. But you will see they're struggling to pay their bills, about 33% of that group. Not just living paycheck to paycheck, but not even having enough really after their paycheck to get by. So they asked, what would you do if a $1,000 repair came up? Would you be able to pay for it cash? Only 39% of the people they surveyed, that Bankrate did, was able to fund $1,000 out of their savings. The rest would have to borrow it, put it on a credit card, find from friends. 61% of people fail to or struggle to cover a $1,000 expense if it came up. This shows kind of a breakdown of some of those same things. Again, regardless of the age group, you can see a lot of people don't have emergency savings accounts. 59% of the people in the 40 to 49 demographic, no emergency savings account. All the way up to 48% in the 70 to 79 demographic. All of that to show it is a behavioral pattern really driving how we look at our philosophy on money. Again, even in the higher income households, you can see a vast percentage that do not have an emergency savings account. And so we're going to talk about those topics as we unpack some of these things. We'll talk about budgeting, we'll talk about savings accounts, we'll talk about different investment vehicles that you should be looking at through the course of your life. Most Americans, 70% having less than $15,000 liquid cash in a savings account. Those in that bracket that struggle to make ends meet, that live paycheck to paycheck each and every time, really sit around $4,000 in liquid cash that they would be able to absorb different things. So why do we look at it? The perspective matters of what we do. This course is called God, Money, and Me. And obviously God is the owner of it all. We have to start at that theological premise of what we do. And if that shapes and drives your behavior patterns, if that shapes and drives your decisions, then it really but it shifts your perspective to the right perspective. I mean, Psalm 24:1, the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof. That's really where we start. Money, a practical necessity. Down to the brass tacks of it, we need money to live, we need money to do things, we need money to survive and make ends meet, and then ultimately me. And I look at it more as a condition of the heart more so than anything, because it ties back to that first point of God being the owner of it all. And when you look at it at the end of the day, we're all called to be stewards. Now, stewards, fancy word or biblical word for a manager. One of the definitions of stewardship that I love is it's a trust granted for profitable use. We've been given a trust by God that what He's put in our hands, we're accountable for, we're responsible for. We're there designed to turn that into a profitable use. And so you look at 1 Corinthians 4:1 and 2, so men ought to regard us as servants of Christ and as those entrusted with the secrets of things of God. And those who have been given that trust must prove faithful. We have to prove faithful in the things that God has loaned us for a period of time. But the reality is, I don't think God's going to give us what we can't manage. Yeah. And so when you look at God, money, and me, and when you examine your personal finances, and when you examine the decisions that you make and the lifestyle decisions that each and every one of us make and face each and every day, it comes back to that perspective of proving faithful. Paul DeYoung writes in his book, God, Money, and Me, that good decisions are managed decisions. Luke 16 is a great test for us as Christians in our perspective towards money. He goes on in verse 11 to say, so if you've not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, how can you be trustworthy handling true riches? Money is really a testing ground for us. This isn't about giving. This isn't about generosity. That's a huge aspect, I believe, that should be part of every one of our lives, and tithing, and obviously in the budget templates that we'll look at, we will include tithing as kind of one of those sort of non-negotiable things as a Christian that we should do. But this is more than just about giving. This is about understanding what the reality of what God has given us and what we've been equipped and entrusted to do. Now, on a side note, there's statistics out there. If every Christian tithed, there'd be an additional $165 billion invested into the purposes of the kingdom of God. I think statistics nowadays are professed evangelical Christians, those that say, I go to church every Sunday or part of an online campus every Sunday, that actually give 10% of their income as a tithe, hovers somewhere maybe between 2 and 3% of professed evangelical Christians. And so you can see the difference it would make just in accomplishing the purposes of God if everybody had that perspective right. But stewards save because they trust God, not because they trust money. Saving ought to be an enjoyable process. I know sometimes we look at it and we think, I just want to enjoy the funds. Culture tells us to enjoy the funds, go spend it on ourselves. But part of what we do, part of what we are to accomplish is saving and being able to resource the things and the desires that God's put in your heart. Because I don't think you can truly resource the desires that God has put in your heart until you're living in a place of financial freedom, rather than living from paycheck to paycheck. We can't put God first and also base our security in the possessions that we have. Yeah. And so money is that testing ground. And oftentimes when you look at it, it's just a symptomatic issue in a lot of people's lives, because mismanaged money can also be an indicator of a mismanaged life. It's a tool that we get to choose what to do with it. If I have a messy desk at work, that affects me. But if I have a messy financial life, that affects my wife, my kids, my family. It affects other people and how we look at it. The desires of our hearts are God-given, but the challenge isn't God, it's us. Yeah. It's our perspective and what we look at. Money in and of itself is neither good nor bad. And God does not change in order to bless us. And I think sometimes we live with this expectation that we can kind of cavalierly go about doing what we want on our own agenda, our own time, and that God will just magically bless us because I'm a faithful giver. And I believe God blesses those that are faithful givers, but I don't think that's absolves us of the responsibility to still steward the remaining percentage of what God has given us, because it's all His anyway. Yeah. Because we are stewarding that anyway. When you look at the woman that gave everything, the last little bit, and they said, oh man, and the disciples are going crazy, but Jesus praises her heart. It wasn't because she gave everything. It was because of the attitude in what she gave it. That attitude is no different than when Joseph in Genesis chapter 41 saves enough money for 7 years for an entire nation. The attitude is exactly the same. But sometimes we misconstrue it and we look at it and we think, man, I just got to give this, I just got to do these things, and that somehow is going to credit me as righteousness. That to me is righteousness. But that's not the reality of what God's outlined for us. He doesn't change in order to bless us. The same attitude that Joseph saved a nation ultimately through his stewarding and saving plan for Pharaoh is the same attitude that widow had when she gave everything. That's the condition of our heart that comes into play in our approach to money. The great Billy Graham said, if a person gets his attitude right towards money, it'll help straighten out almost every other area of their life. And that is the person most known for bringing probably the most people to Jesus in the course of any of our lifetime. The distinctive, even in Joseph and that widow, was not their bank accounts, but how they used their opportunities given by God. And the distinctive that sets you apart isn't the amount that's in your bank account. And yet we got to look at that and we've got to allocate it properly and we've got to resource it right. But how are you going to use the opportunities that God has given you? Because the Bible is full of money topics on finance. Over 2,000 verses deal with money and possessions. 16 of Jesus' 38 parables dealt with finances in some way. Now, there were broader life lessons that Jesus, of course, tried to bring out of that. It wasn't solely about money, but 16 of 38. 1 out of every 6 verses in Matthew, Mark, and Luke relate to money and possessions. 3 times more verses in the Bible about money and possessions than love. 7 times more than prayer. And 8 times more than belief. So that's why we're taking the time to invest into you, to invest into those watching online and to our different campuses, because the Bible addresses this so intimately and so detailed in a sense of our attitude, our posture toward the resources that God has given us. Matthew 6:24, no one can serve 2 masters. You can't serve both God and money. But as I said in the promo for leading up to this, we all have to learn how to serve God with money. That's really what this is about, because culture tells us earn your paycheck, go spend it, enjoy it. Oh yeah, pay off some debt and maybe save some for retirement. Whereas the Bible says, no, earn the money, give, save, enjoy. It's just it's the same steps, the same actions that we take, just in a slightly different order. And when we prioritize it correctly, when we look at it from that aspect, freedom only comes when we no longer see ourselves as the owners of all that we have. Parable of the talents really outlines to me money management in the Bible. Matthew 25, and he goes through, and many of us know that story. The master gives somebody 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent. Baseline of what we do and what you do in your personal finances is that you have acquired money from the master. You all have a job, or you're in search of a job. You all have an income source. You've acquired money from the master. It's allocated in some way. Now, when we look at talents, the different studies show there was probably about a 70-pound piece of gold, more or less. And so when we look at this, you're all given something. If I looked at you and said, man, what would you do if you had $3 million? Most of us would be like, that's amazing. I'd love it. The median household income in the United States is around $67,000, $68,000, depending on, what source that you look at. You're probably going to work for probably 45 years, anywhere from age 22 to 67. Every one of us, if you multiply that out, it's about $3 million. Every one of us will be given millions of dollars to steward, to deal with, that will come across your hands, that will come across your hearts that will come across your profile of management, what are we going to do with it? Most of us think, I would like to be a millionaire. You're all going to manage millions of dollars of money. And that's the allocation that comes from this. Now, you've got to know when you're in leadership. The other thing I love about this parable is he knew who to give the 5 to. He knew who to give the 2 to. He knew who to give the 1 to. The grace of God is that we all get something. But he knew, so the person that got 5 talents, probably 70 pounds of gold, today's value, $1.4 million. So that person probably got, $6-7 million worth of money to manage for that owner. And the other person, the 1 talent, got 3 million. And we all know they did different things with it. The person that had 5, the verse that I love is it says he immediately put his money to work. And that's what you have to do with your money. That's the perspective shift that comes into play. Now, for a lot of us at different stages and seasons of life, putting your money to work can be as simple as having a budget and planning your spending. I think somewhere in the neighborhood of, I saw something in the Wall Street Journal said, about 70% of people maybe write a budget, 19% of people probably stick to the budget that they wrote or reviewed the budget that they drafted. The person that had the 5 put his money to work, immediately took it and planned it, found a way for resources, because he understood, like Alexander Dumas said, do not value money for any more or any less than it's worth. It is a good servant, but a bad master. And then finally, Luke 24, 14, 28 through 30. Suppose one of you wants to build a tower, who's not going to sit down and estimate the cost? That's putting your money to work. And then as you begin to build margin into your life, and we'll talk a little bit about margin next week when we talk about budgeting. When you begin to build margin into your life, you begin to understand the freedom that you can have to resource other things. But too many of us, just like a Word document that you would have, has built-in margins, like it keeps you off of the edges. Your financial life should have built-in margins that keep you off the edge and off the brink of your finances. You've got to be able to build that in and estimate the cost and put your money to work. And then ultimately in verse 19, the master came back for an account. Now for some of you, that's going to be your family, spouse, accountable to. Those that are single, I would still find somebody that you can be accountable to. Now, be smart like the master, know who to bring into that world. And it's not necessarily opening up the details of everything that you have, but whether it's a financial advisor, whether it's somebody that you really trust, just somebody. Life works better with accountability. Yeah. Finances work better with accountability. And so that master came back for an account. They had to give an account of what they did with that. And that's really how the Bible outlines some of the simple practices of money management. Just how we steward every aspect of our life, some of that applies, we just have to apply it to our finances. And we just have to look at it in a different way. Good stewards know how to reproduce. They know how to be that 5-talent person, that 2-talent person that went out and reproduced with the thing that God has given them. They're proactive. They don't live in fear of stepping out. And I know money weighs on you. Money weighs on the decisions that we make. And when we look at our bank accounts and it's not where we want it to be, and it can exasperate us, kind of like raising a child, it can exasperate us. And so we can look at it and we can get caught in the trap of fear rather than taking a step back, finding some accountability in it and working your way through it. And just by taking this course, walking through this workshop over the next couple of weeks, those walking through it online, you're taking some of those steps in the right direction that the Bible outlines. William James says, nothing is so fatiguing as the hanging on of an uncompleted task. And oftentimes, when only 20% of people kind of review or stick to the budget that they wrote, that leaves about 80% of people with an unfinished task. Yeah. That is weighing on them, that is fatiguing on them, that they can't seem to get ahead of it because they just don't tackle it. And then it builds up and then it begins to steamroll and then you begin to look at it and now it seems insurmountable rather than just taking a deep breath, coming back to it. Financial trouble didn't happen overnight, typically. And it's not going to be overnight that you begin to emerge out of it, but it is a process that you look at it. And it can be fatiguing when we look at it. Our own personal story, we were in the Navy prior to, I say we because if anybody's been married to a military person, it's definitely the both of you, but we were in the military before joining the church staff. And at the time we were joining the church staff, you don't join a church staff to earn a large income. But we took a 72% cut in pay at the time that I transitioned from the Navy into working on the church staff. And I'll talk about some of the things we had done prior to that to absorb some of that reality. But that's a substantial chunk. That's a substantial, you take a deep breath when you look at what your paycheck was. And then at the same time, coupled with that decision, we had made a decision for our family that we would be single income at the time because Lydia was pregnant. We were about to have a kid. And so we were going from a dual income, no kid house, a dink house, to a sick house, a single income with a kid. And so, but those are big number changes. Those are big shifts in what you look at and do. And it can weigh on you. But plans fail for a lack of counsel. But with many advisors, they succeed. Proverbs 15:22. And then ultimately, really the foundational principle of what we do, and I'm going to ask at this time Dr. Joe to join me, and we're going to grab a chair for him as well. But one of the foundational principles that we do really revolves around contentment. When you look at money decisions, when you look at lifestyle decisions, and Joe taught me this better than anybody and has been in the business for many years. And why don't you tell them a little bit about your background and as well for those watching online.
All right. Well, I got here via the U.S. Navy, as many people did. And I started as a stockbroker, we used to call ourselves, back in 1981 with a company called E.F. Hutton. I've been in the business ever since. I worked on Wall Street for a few years. I was a branch manager for 12 years. I was first vice president of investments with Payne Webber. I own my own investment firm now. We manage money for, I think, 850 people in 9 countries around the world. First thing I would tell you is your ability to manage your personal finances correctly has nothing to do with your knowledge of how the financial world works. Believe it or not, most financial advisors, when I say most, I mean almost every financial advisor I've known, their personal finances are a shambles. I'm serious. You bring me 100 financial advisors. No, and I'm going to explain why. Because it's not, you're out there thinking, it's the reason my finances may not be where I want them is I just don't know enough. If I could learn more, that's not it at all. Seriously, you give me 100 financial advisors, at least 90 of them will be penniless and in debt up to their eyeballs. Why? Okay, why is it that you have trouble managing your money and getting to your goals and wanting that? Replace the whole concept of money with food. So, pretend, for example, if you're married or you're single now. When you think of yourself as single and you knew this person, they used to live in town, and you were head over heels in love with them, and they moved away for a few years, and they're going to be coming back in 6 months. How easy would it be for you to really get on a diet, stick to a diet, go to the gym? You're able to turn down, the bowl of ice cream. You're able to not go get the French fries. You're able to eat the right stuff. Why? Because you want to look as good as possible when this person gets back in town, all right? The same issue about money is the reason that you haven't probably done the things with money is because you haven't associated the idea of getting my finances in shape with something that means something to you.
Yeah.
People who try to lose weight because they want to lose weight tend not to lose weight. I want to lose 15 pounds. I have wanted to lose 15 pounds for the last 15 or 20 years. But I'd rather eat a bowl of ice cream at night than lose 15 pounds. Let's be honest. I don't want to do what it takes. So the first thing I will tell you, if you really want to get your personal finances in shape, stop trying to get them in shape because you want to get your finances in shape. You need to think of a reason. Why is that you want to get it in shape? Think of a purpose out there. The second thing is, Paul talks about in Philip. I was about to say in Filipinos. That's for Kino out there. Filipinos 4. Philippians 4. He says, "I've learned, the secret of being content in good times and bad times." And I think every sermon I've ever heard that is preached from the wrong point of view. And this is something that I have seen from other people. Most people think that you get in trouble because you're not content when things are bad, because you're in lack and you don't have enough money and your finances aren't what they should be. That is not when you are probably going to get yourself in trouble. That is not the dangerous time of your life. The most dangerous time, when you are most likely to screw up your financial life for decades, is when things are good and you're making a lot of money. That's when you will do stuff that you really shouldn't do. It's not being content in bad times that's the secret. It's being content in good times. So that's when things are good and you're making money, you buy a house that you really shouldn't buy, and then we go into a recession, you lose your job, you can't afford that, or something like that. The other thing I would tell you, for example, is, and this is important, I want you to remember this, be careful about bringing yourself into a lifestyle that you can't maintain. For example, you have an uncle who dies, we live in the time of, term insurance. He leaves part of it to you. You get a check for $100,000. You've always wanted this Mercedes. It's a beautiful car and it's all expensive and you've always wanted this one. So you're going to take $85,000 of that money and buy that Mercedes. All right? Here's the problem with that. The Mercedes isn't going to last forever. And someday you're going to need a new car. And so someday you're going to get a new car and you're going to get a brand new Toyota Camry. Fine car, right? Fine car. But you're used to driving a Mercedes now. Now you get yourself a brand new Toyota Camry and you are miserable because you have to drive this brand new Toyota Camry, right? Because you're used to driving a Mercedes. So when things are really good, we tend to bring ourselves into a position that we cannot maintain. So I would tell you the point of your life that has the most danger is not when things are bad, it's when things are good.
That's great. And we've talked over the years and expound a little more, if you can, on money's not really the cost of something. When you talking the opportunity cost of things. There is no kind of independent financial decision that's out there.
Sure. Okay. So while it doesn't do this every year, historically, the stock market average is making 10% a year. Averages are, I got to be careful about averages, okay? So for example, I'm 5.5 feet tall, okay? Josh Coxwell, I believe, Pastor Josh, is 6'8". Last week, we were in the back room over at Seaboard, and we were the only two. So the average man in that room was 6'2". But no man in that room was 6'2".
Right.
Okay. All right. So always be careful when people throw averages at you. Anyway, so the stock market historically averages 10% a year. So if you put your money in your 401k and you left it there for 30 years, you're probably, if you just put it in a stock fund, one that's 100% stocks, over your lifetime, you're going to average 10% a year. How many of you have heard, I could borrow money out of my 401k and it's only going to cost me 5% a year or 4% a year? You ever hear that? Mm-hmm. Wrong. Because if you borrow that money out of the 401k, what aren't you making on that? You're not making the 10% a year. It's actually costing you 14% a year now for that money, right? Because you're not making the money. So, when you look at the cost of something, there's what you are not getting on that while you don't have it. So you got to be, always,
Yeah, like buying a new Mac or something like that, that's not really the cost. The cost is it worth the vacation I may not be funding or the retirement I may not be funding? When you analyze those decisions and you kind of have to weigh up what you aren't getting.
Sure. The example I remember giving Josh, and this goes back to something Josh mentioned earlier, but just like your diet, okay? It's a choice. Am I going, tonight, am I going to eat the cupcake or am I going to eat the salad? All right, you're going to make a choice on that. All right, so everything is a choice. A number of years ago, I had this couple. They were retired and they came in and we were talking about a Mercedes earlier. He wanted to buy a Mercedes and it was going to cost him about, to lease the Mercedes. He wanted to lease the Mercedes. It was going to be about $500 a month. And he really thought he could afford that. The wife didn't think they could afford that. So let's go talk to Joe. So I said, when they came to me, I said, okay, let me ask you a question. I kind of knew the answer to some of these things. I said, if you're asking, could you afford to pay $500 a month for the Mercedes? You can, but that's not the question you should ask. I want to ask you this. If God came to you today and said, I will just give you one of two things, okay? I will give you the Mercedes for free. It's yours. Or I will give you every year for free an all-expense paid vacation to take your grandchildren to Orlando to Disney World. Which one of the two would you rather have, a Mercedes or a free trip for a week with your grandchildren every week to Disney World? I knew how much they loved their grandkids. They said, I'd much rather have, the trip to Orlando with the grandkids. I said, well, a Disney vacation is going to cost you about $6,000 a year. That Mercedes is going to cost you $6,000 a year. So the question isn't, can I afford the Mercedes? The question is, what would I rather spend $6,000 a year on?
Right.
So, you want to have a house in Great Neck? You want to have a house in Windsor Woods. It's cheaper in Windsor Woods than in Great Neck. You got to make a choice. What do you want?
Yeah, absolutely. I saw the definition of contentment once as admire without the need to acquire. And I think that's what Paul's talking about, being able to continually practice contentment and the decisions that we make. And what you see up there, there's no such thing as an independent financial decision. It's all intertwined, it's all interrelated, and all has consequences, both good and bad, on the other side of it. And so when you look at those things in Proverbs chapter 23 in the New Living Translation, it says, don't wear yourself out to be rich. Have the wisdom to show restraint. And I think sometimes when we look at it, and as Joe so eloquently talked about, and we got different categories of needs, wants, and desires, and the different things that we have. And you'll see other financial advisors, and Ramsey gets a bad rap sometimes that he's too hard-nosed, but he's always talked about, make sure the four walls are taken care of first: food, shelter, transportation, clothing, those types of things. Even before you get out of debt and cut up all your credit cards, he would still say those things. In 1 Timothy 6:8, but if we have food and clothing, we will be content with that. And then we get into our wants, which really boils down to some of those lifestyle decisions and opportunity costs that Joe talked about. Okay, am I going to Ruth's Chris tonight, or am I going to Outback because of the different costs? Or am I going out to eat it all because I can cook a steak on the grill for even cheaper than all of that? Am I getting the new car, the used car, the Mercedes versus the Toyota? And so you look at those things, and then you ultimately get to your desires, those things that you believe God's really put in your heart. And I think the only way you can truly reach the desires is when you're financially free. When you have that margin built in to your life to be able to do that, because money always overpromises and underdelivers, in my opinion, as far as our attitude towards it. It's our attitude, our mental approach towards our financial life. And you have to practice contentment continually. Self-restraint today will yield self-reliance tomorrow. And so the restraint that you have, I heard somebody, and it might have even been Joe, I'm not sure, but you want your decisions to pass the tomorrow test. Will I wake up tomorrow and say, oh, this was a good decision? Will I wake up 10 years from now and say, man, looking back, that was the best decision. I'm glad I made that decision back then when. I'd have a whole lot more money if on deployment and different tax-free zones, if I had said, man, you know what, I'm going to save this and put this away, or have it fund something a little bit more meaningful than the Liberty calls that we went on in different ports. And I come back from a 6-month deployment and think, wow, tax-free money, and I have no more than I had before I left, and I probably have less. And I didn't spend it on our family because Lydia was back here, and I was on deployment. And so, will it pass the tomorrow test? And when you look at it, and there's a book out there called Predictably Irrational, and it talks about different decoys that businesses put in your life or put in front of you and different things. Restaurant puts the thing they want you to buy next to the higher price item on the menu so that you'll pick that thing. That's got their highest profit margin. They actually don't want you to buy the highest price thing. They want you to buy that thing they put next to it because that's where they have more profit margin. Or even when we make decisions, Williams-Sonoma, when they first launched bread makers, they weren't selling at all. They launched a deluxe version. All of a sudden, that original version looked like a bargain, and they started flying off the shelves. Even when we switched we kind of gone to a pretty much cashless in all our transactions. I don't know a lot of people that carry cash anymore. You spend, I think initially when people started shifting to that and debit cards became more the tone, or credit cards became more the tone of how you made purchases at fast food places, everything, you spent 12 to 18% more than you did when you were using cash. And so you look at these things, and all those decisions that you make, they really kind of need to pass that tomorrow test, and you want to wake up feeling.
Why Las Vegas is giving you chips
right.
instead of cash.
That's right.
You would never gamble that much cash,
That's
but
right.
you would on a little chip.
Absolutely. And so we're going to examine those things over these next few weeks, examine some of those budgeting principles, some budgeting hacks to look at it and see. And really, the lifestyle decisions determine not only the direction you'll go, but also how intensely you'll pursue them. When they look at it, even people hear budgeting and they think, okay. Budgeting is a freeing thing. Like I said, it's putting your money to work. It's giving you the freedom to choose where you want it to go. Now, there's necessities you got to pay for and look at, but you don't want to be sitting there at the end of the month and thinking, where did it all go? Mint, which is a financial service out there that reconciles or imports bank accounts, allows you to balance your checkbook in an electronic and digital means. 65% of the people they serve don't know how much they spent last month. The largest group that did were boomers. Gen Z, millennials not faring so well as far as where they knew what they spent. And then most of us live in this reality through the course of each month. We kind of look back and say, man, I wish I spent less last month. 31% of the people they talked to wish they spent less the previous month. Motley Fool, another site that's out there. Average person, American, goes over their budget by about $7,500 a year. So you end up spending, I think they say somewhere around 40% of Americans spend 110% of their income each year. Somewhere around that way. Other countries save a little better. They save for retirement a little better. They save for their paychecks. We like to enjoy the life. And I'm not, and I don't think Joe is, and we'll hear through the course of this, I'm not as hardcore in my own opinions as like a Dave Ramsey is, and that's no knock on him as far as you need to enjoy life. You need to enjoy saving. It should be part of what we do. But it doesn't take that long. That $7,400, that's really going over your budget about $20 a day. That's not that hard to do, but over the course of a year, it really adds up and impacts what we do. And so you've got to be on the same page with the people that are in your house. So as we wrap up, thanks, Joe, I appreciate it. If God gave you an audit, what grade do you think he would give you? And examine it through the course of this week. If God gave you an audit, what grade do you think he would give you? Talk about it with your spouse if that applies to you. And really examine what you want from your money. Develop a strategic plan for your money. Develop a vision for it. And what you'll see an example here in a few slides of a financial creed. And I got that from a guy named Derek Holzer. And you see it a lot in the Mormon faith of all things, where they brand their family, so to speak, with a financial creed. Stephen Covey wrote 7 Highly Effective Habits for Families. And he's a guy of Latter-day Saint background, but they are very good at branding their family, branding their lives as to what they want out of their family. A mission statement for their family, a mission statement for their financial life, for what values that they have as it. And they have regular family meetings. And it's something, I think, where even what Joe was talking about, knowing what you want out of it. Do you want the trip with the grandkids, or do you want the Mercedes? And if you have that family creed, that family financial creed, it just keeps you pointing in the right direction. It just keeps you pointing back to something bigger. It just keeps you pointing back to those great things that you believe God has put in your heart. And then what do you believe you need in order to live free of financial stress? What do you believe you need? You know, in an overgeneralization of money and attitudes towards money, they would say typically males view it as a status thing, females view it as a security thing, and that's a broad generalization. I know that, but when you look at it and see, the irony is statistics actually show men do more online shopping than women, for those that like to tout the reverse. And so I am the spender in our family. Lydia is the saver, and we have different backgrounds, and probably a lot of that speaks to it, but I'll be quick to spend the money, and she will be quick not to. Works out great for me in the long run. But we're on the same page in the broad scope and broad theme of what we want to do as a couple. Finances is often symptomatic manifestation of a deeper problem when it comes to marriage. And 84% of married couples say money causes tension in their lives. It's one of the leading causes of dissension in a marriage is financial priorities. There's a National Marriage Project said there's a 45% increase to the chance of divorce when one partner felt like the other foolishly spent money. Only drugs and affairs were a stronger predictor. And so when you examine what you want out of it, and maybe you're not in that season of life, but it almost more so important to have that creed, because you can walk through saying, oh, well, I'm kind of owed this. You know, you may have walked through challenges in your life. I'm kind of due this. All the more important to have that financial and that value, that creed that you have for yourself, and the values that you hold as an individual, so that you can set yourself up. Because sometimes you don't have necessarily the readily accountability built in with that partner there, and you can get down this attitude of, well, I'm kind of owed this, and so you want to avoid some of those traps. But in your marriage, for those that are in that season, don't keep money secrets from each other. That's when it starts to go awry. Secret accounts, secret bank accounts. I'm doing this on the side. This is my she money. She don't know I got it. You know, all those types of things. It's just going to lead, because money doesn't just represent money. Yeah. If anything, it's just a tool. It doesn't represent just money. It represents security. It represents love. It represents control. It represents freedom. All of these things. And we seem to be okay to talk to even our kids and family as we raise them about faith. We seem okay to talk to them about God. But then we don't really go there with the money side of things with them. And they're not taught as well as they could be through life in it. Proverbs 21:5, the plans of the diligent lead to profit as surely as haste leads to poverty. The Good News Translation puts it this way, same verse, plan carefully and you will have plenty. If you act too quickly, you will never have enough. If you act too quickly. So we're going to take some time over these next couple weeks and not necessarily acting too quickly in what we look at. So you're going to, online, on the website, under the events, you'll see God, Money, and Me resources. And these are available to you now. They're already posted. There's a couple different templates for a few different things. And before next session, spend some time going over it. Before you log into session 2, spend some time doing some of these exercises. Number 1, a family financial creed. And there's a template. I'll show you a template here in just a minute. Walk through it. But develop something for your family or you as an individual. What your values are. What that purpose was that Joe talked about that you have in mind. And you're not just aimlessly walking about wanting to lose 15 pounds for the next 20 years. But that $3 million that God's going to give you through the course of your life, what do you want to do with it? What do you want to be looked at and say, okay, I'm stewarding this. What am I going to do with it? And so, secondly, financial goals. There's another, it's a very simple worksheet that's on there, and you just list out your goals. And then thirdly, track your spending. For those of us that may be in that 65% group that didn't know where their money went over the last 30 days. Because I think you'll discover some habits and some tendencies that you may not have realized you had. Because remember, that $7,500 over budget that so many people do each and every year came from $20 a day. And so I think when you look at it and see, because it can be so easy to just swipe and keep moving, and all of a sudden you look at it. Now I'm a bit, I may be the spender, but I'm a bit, probably much, in the amount of time I look at it. Like, I mean, I download it every week. I reconcile it every week. My checkbook and everything. And so Lydia's not that involved in that side of things with the scope of trying to do it every week. I just like looking at it, and I just retool it and reshape it and stuff like that. You don't have to do it every week. That's probably overkill for some of you. But as you develop this habit, as you develop some of these habits, it might be every week for a season. It might be every month I write a new budget and start over at zero. And we'll talk about zero-based budgeting a little bit next week as well. It might be doing it diligently over the course of some time so that we build and ingrain the habit into what we do. And then, so financial creed, and that's going to be hard to read for many of you, but kind of a basic mission statement. Review your family priorities and paint a picture of your ultimate destination. Spending, saving, giving, things that you want to mind, travel, where you want to go. Those bucket list type items that you have. The destination, prioritize your values and express your destination in a couple sentences. This example, the Smith family values generosity, thrift, and understands the benefits of delayed gratification. The Smith family believes in investing in self-improvement before spending on leisure. The Smith family is committed to disciplined saving, regular and increased charitable giving, and shrewd spending. And then distill each value into some mission steps. And just take the time and the exercise to invest in yourself, your thought process of where you want to go as a couple, where you want to go as an individual, where you want to go as a family. And develop those things and have that purpose in mind and develop a strategic plan for your life and the things that God's given you. So this sample is posted on the website. And again, if you go to wavechurch.com, the events tab across the top, there's a section called God, Money, and Me Resources. And we'll be posting each and every week to the different templates so that you have them all available. And so this is on there as well as this, which is just kind of a blank Word document for you to be able to fill in the different sections at your leisure. The first one's a PDF that you wouldn't be able to modify, but this one's a Word document that you can modify. Again, financial freedom goals. List them out. They can be small. They can be, I want to get out of credit card debt. Can be, I want to save money towards my retirement because my company matches it. Whatever it is, list it out. Put the type of goal that it is and when you want to do it. And the goal types you'll see at the bottom. There could be an earnings goal. It could be a giving goal. It could be a savings goal. Whatever it is, list it out. List out the different goals that you have in life for your money, for what God has given you. I should say His money because ultimately we're stewards of it. But for what God has given you and have the goals for it. And then ultimately, track your spending. Now, there's a lot of digital resources out there that you can do it. What will be posted online will be Excel templates, but if you use a Mint.com or if you use a Quicken or Banktivity, for those that have Mac, because Quicken on Mac is kind of, I used Quicken for years, but on a Mac, it's not as good. Banktivity is what I use on a Mac. But track your spending. List it out. Go online, go to your bank, pull 30 days of history, and track it and categorize it. And see where and what you're spending your money on, and see where your income comes. And once you categorize it, you can begin, and we'll dive more into it next week, you can begin to just kind of put it into a budget template. And this budget template's online as well. And some of the formulas are in there as well, and different category headings that you may want to use. And just see, okay, do I have more coming in? I'll list my income sources, and I list my outgo. And do I have more coming in than is going out, or is it vice versa? And so try to spend some time before next week, really on the really on the broad scope, as today was much more of a broad overview on a philosophy towards money, a philosophy towards habits, and really begin to think and prioritize your financial future. And so next week we'll talk more about budgeting and debt and different tools to get out of debt and tackle that. And then we'll get into retirement investing, some different things along those lines. But really utilize those tools. It really boils back to our behaviors. It really boils back to our habits. And so you want to create those good money habits as early as possible. Because when we start talking about compound interest and different things, which I think Joe calls the eighth wonder of the world or something along those lines, you'll want to be able to develop those habits early so that when you're sitting years down the track, you're not like some of those earlier charts where you're in your 50s and 60s and you don't have the emergency savings account. And the reality is wherever you are, start and begin to happen. Financial challenges don't necessarily develop overnight. They take a course of time, and then they take a course of time to get out. But when you prioritize it correctly and you stay on the journey, you begin to get past the needs, past the wants, and into the desire stage of what God's put in your heart to really be able to fund some of those things and to live, quote unquote, a fully funded life. And that's really what we want to get to. The discipline today for the self-reliance tomorrow. And I think Dave Ramsey puts it as live like no one else today so that you can live like no one else tomorrow, and those types of things. And we'll talk about different savings models. The book, the resource that's available to you, Paul DeYoung has a savings model in him for his context that has worked well for him. We'll show you a few different ones, and you pick what works for you. There's no necessarily, as Joe said, the math's the easy part, the personal finance. You don't have to know every in and out. You don't have to know what Bitcoin's trading at right now. You start at different places and work your way up to those different vehicles and different arms. But thanks, appreciate it.